Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. I have an amazing guest with me today who's really going to talk about overcoming obstacles and resilience and having your best life ever. Her name is Debbie Weiss. She is a best-selling author, coach, inspirational speaker, and podcaster who inspires women to take control of their lives by harnessing their inner power, regardless of their circumstances. With over 50 years experience dealing with some of life's toughest challenges, Debbie is an expert in chasing your own dreams in spite of your circumstances. She is the best-selling author of the memoir, On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, as well as a co-author in the Amazon best-selling collaborative book titled Heart Whispers. Debbie is also an entrepreneur, running both an insurance agency and her online store, A Sprinkle of Hearts. The host of the Maybe I Can podcast, family caregiver and mother, she has overcome her own limiting beliefs and fears, allowing her to live her best life, and it is her passion to now help others do the same. Debbie, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. When I saw your profile and I went to your beautiful website, I love that website, and I was reading more about you and your history, you truly are an incredible person and such an inspiration that we can recover from anything and have the life that we want.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Um, you know, when I started this journey, I thought to myself, how much have I really overcome? It's just regular stuff. And before I started to write my book, that was a limiting belief that was stopping me because I felt like if I didn't have some kind of, and I hate to say it, but some horrible big trauma, that it wasn't valid. But in the end, I realized, you know what? Luckily, the majority of us have those little traumas along the way that kind of eat at us and rule our lives. So, I realized my story might be more relatable to most people.
Right. Well, all those little traumas certainly do add up, and life isn't always easy. And I always like to say that life is full of hits, and none of us get out of this roller coaster without having our own fair share of them. And it's how we handle them that really sets us for the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. And I was handling them for a very long time on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but the way I was thinking about it internally was really holding me back.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so why don't you just tell us your story, tell us your history. What really slapped me and got my attention right away was that you were a primary caregiver for your dad.
Yes. So my dad at 45 had a massive stroke the day after I graduated from high school. And he survived, and my parents were divorced, and he became my responsibility for the rest of his life, which was 30 years. He did not live with me. However, I was responsible for figuring out places that he could live where people would take care of him appropriately on a limited budget. I, handled his money. I did his shopping, his clothes, his food, whatever he needed. And over the years, for many reasons, we did have to move him from place to place. And so at a very young age, I learned about the difference between Medicare and Medicaid and institutional Medicaid and, all kinds of things that a 20-something-year-old typically is not exposed to. And when I had my oldest son at the age of 2, he was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum.
Mm.
And that set me off into mama bear mode. And boy, I was and still am super passionate about
Mm.
doing whatever I can to help him. I also have a younger son. Luckily, he's got typical problems, let's say.
Mhm.
And last but not least, my husband, over the last 5 years of his life, was suffering from both mental illness and different physical illnesses.
Oh.
And out of the blue, he was diagnosed with a terminal blood cancer that was unrelated to any of his other conditions. And he only lived about 6 months from that date. So
Oh,
I was, his caregiver at home.
I am so sorry.
Thank you.
That's an awful lot to go through. And I just keep thinking about that young woman who graduated high school and the next day gets the rug swept out from underneath her.
And I was such a daddy's little girl, you know.
Oh,
And so, besides the fact that I had to take care of him, and I didn't obviously realize this at the time, but you get that role reversal that many of us have, when we're middle aged,
mm-hmm,
not when we're 17. And now all of a sudden, I lost my father,
mm-hmm.
in that way.
Well, and
And that
not
was
only
very
that,
difficult.
well, of course, but not only that, then trying to deal with the Medicare, the Medicaid, the finances at 17 and 18, starting to do that, that's an incredible amount of responsibility. And it's confusing enough to me as an adult. So, did you have anybody that you could rely on? Did you have any family or friends or whatever who were able to guide you or at least be there and support you?
Yeah, so I really didn't start taking full care of him at 17. My mother did help. He had a lot of different hospitalizations and rehab stints and stuff like that after the
Hmm.
stroke. And so it really wasn't until I was about 21, right after I graduated college or my senior year, that he actually moved into a facility.
Hmm.
I always had my mother for a resource, but quite honestly, she didn't really have experience with it either. She was 21 when she had me, so she was only 40.
Wow.
And so she really didn't have experience. And I did have my aunt, my dad's sister,
Hmm.
who was an incredible resource and even more so just always there for me.
Hmm.
So at least I felt like she was kind of my partner, even though I was taking the lead, but I could always, count on her to help me out.
Hmm. I want to go back and just ask you, it's not relevant really, but I'm curious, since he was so young when he had this massive stroke, did he have any symptoms up until that time? Were there any signs or anything that that was obviously causing this or caused the stroke?
So, what caused the stroke was that his carotid arteries were one side was 100% blocked, and the other side, I don't recall, but let's just say it was 80 or 90% blocked. And that's what happened. Looking back, yes, he had signs where all of a sudden he was dropping things all the time, and he was, forgetting what he was saying with his train of thought. And looking back, I recall that the doctor said that those were probably TIAs, which I can't remember what that stands for, but they're like mini strokes.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always going to the doctor. He was a smoker. He was not really overweight.
Mm-hmm.
He had high blood pressure. He had hypertension. A cholesterol issue, but medication. And I think back then, especially, nobody was thinking that it's a possibility to have a stroke at 45 years old. We're really
Right.
thinking about, I think, more of a heart related issue,
Mm-hmm.
especially based on family history.
Mm-hmm.
And, for a while, I personally blamed his doctor, which was really unfair of me. But because there were signs, how could you
Mm-hmm.
not check this out? But, everybody's human.
Mhm. Well, as a medical person, I was already wondering why nobody noticed that his carotid pulse was weak. Because if they would have checked the one side that was completely occluded, they would not have felt a pulse. So I just think that, yeah, I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I,
Mhm.
remind myself there's no point. I did for a long time, like I said, held a
Mhm.
grudge.
Mhm. So talk about what happened then when you turned 50, because here you are, you have this mindset or this role for yourself where you were taking care of everybody else except yourself.
Correct. I was. By the time I turned 50, my dad had passed away a couple years before that.
Mhm.
And my kids were probably like 10 and 12. And my husband was starting to show some signs of more intense anxiety than he had had before.
Mhm.
And my friends said to me, "You're turning 50. We want to take you away for a couple of days." And I said, "I can't go. I can't leave my husband. He'll never be able to handle it. And I'll be so nervous the whole entire time that I won't even enjoy myself." But
Mhm.
they convinced me. And the minute that we all met at the airport, the laughter started. I
Mhm.
forgot about my family at home. Forget the worrying. I wasn't worried. It was a weekend, an extended weekend of just relaxation and fun and laughing and just feeling free.
Mhm.
And in that moment, I realized how my life had not been my own.
Mhm.
And something about turning 50, as I mentioned to you before, something about turning 50 was very different than 40 and any of those other ages, because it was kind of like a come to terms with the fact, okay, I have really let the circumstances of my life dictate the direction. I was not taking any role. Sure, little things, but not really in the overall direction. And I just envisioned myself on my deathbed looking back, thinking, how come I didn't do, this? And I didn't really have a this. I wish I could say, oh, I always wanted to skydive. I don't know.
Mhm.
I didn't have those things. I didn't know what this was, but I just knew in my gut I was not living a fulfilled life
Mhm.
and thought there must be more.
I love the fact that once you were whisked away, it was almost like family, what family?
Yeah.
And it was the first time probably in your life that you were able to think of only yourself.
Exactly. I mean, I remember when they said, "What do you want to do today?" or "Where do you want to go for dinner?" I was looking over my shoulder like, are they talking to me or are they talking to somebody else? It was amazing, amazing feeling. And it was so funny because once we were there, I said, "Oh, I wish I would have agreed to stay 3 nights or 4 nights, because it was so great."
Oh, how fantastic. So then, okay, I'm thinking that this must have been an incredibly liberating experience as well as an awakening as well. When you were going home from that trip, did you decide that things were going to have to change?
I don't think that I was consciously mapping that out.
Mhm.
However, I did start to take action, and my first action was trying to get healthy. I've always struggled with my weight from literally the minute that I was born, and it's been a big part of my life. It's a big part of my identity and my limiting beliefs and not feeling good about myself. And at that point, I was about 100 pounds or more overweight. And I decided I'd go back to Weight Watchers, just like everyone else who struggled. I tried all the
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
but for me, Weight Watchers, was the most realistic.
Mhm.
But I approached it completely different than I had in the past. In the past, I would go and say, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to lose at least 25 pounds in the first 3 months or by my birthday or by the summer. And if I don't, forget it. This is useless. And
Mhm.
instead, this time, I said, I'm not going to worry about the weight. I'm not going to worry about what I'm eating.
Mhm.
I'm just going to commit to going to a meeting every week. That's it.
Mhm.
That is my goal. And that's what I did for a couple of months. And my weight, I really didn't lose weight. But once I felt comfortable and it was part of my regular routine, I added in something else. So I said, okay, now I'm going to pay attention to what I'm eating and I'm going to track my food, 50% of the time, 5 days a week. And I continued down that path, just slowly, adding new goals.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you, now that was, I don't even know, let's say 8 years ago.
Mhm.
I still haven't reached the goal,
Mhm.
but that's okay. I lost about 90 pounds, maybe over 3 years. I mean, it was not quick, but I realized it was like I had this revelation where the entire time or in my entire life, I felt sorry for myself. Why
Mhm.
am I the one who has to deal with the weight issue? Why is everybody else thin? I would look and watch other people. Look at
Mhm.
she or he can eat that, but if I look at that, I'm going to gain 10 pounds.
Mhm.
And I never stopped to realize, maybe that person doesn't eat like that 7 days a week, 3 meals a
Mhm.
day. Maybe that's their indulgence for the week.
Mhm.
And this is not on again, off again. This is forever.
Mhm.
And I have to find something that I'm comfortable with. And
Mhm.
once I realized that I was never going to be off,
Mhm.
that shift was really helpful for me. And after I lost the 90 pounds, I've gained back 7, 10, 15. I kind of capped it at 15 and then am able to, come back down. But I've never been able to do that before.
Mhm. Well, first of all, congratulations on the weight loss. That is just absolutely a huge accomplishment. And
Thank you.
I really love the fact, and I really hope the listeners are paying close attention to this, the small goal. And the difference between going to Weight Watchers and saying, okay, 25 pounds in 3 months versus, look, I'm just going to go to one meeting a week and see what happens. So you don't want to set really huge goals for yourself. It's the small ones because those are the ones that eventually they become a habit. You don't think about it. And then you can set the next small goal and the next small goal. And it just all kind of, just kind of accumulates. So,
Exactly. And I never, it was that mindset shift that allowed me to be successful.
mhm, mhm. So when you with your coaching practice, do you focus on things like weight loss and health? Because I really like the fact that you were starting to, instead of just I'm going to lose the weight, you started to focus on getting more healthy.
Absolutely. I my coaching is not geared towards any specific area.
Mhm.
Each person decides what area they need to work on.
Mhm.
Weight was just one of them for me. Once I saw
Mhm.
that by shifting my thoughts, by changing my mindset and how I was approaching things with my weight, then I was able to start applying it to other areas of my life.
Mhm.
And when I started doing that, then I realized, I'm the one in control. I
Mhm.
can lose weight even if I have to go to a wedding and a party and, all of these things that maybe I can't do anything about. Yeah, I could stay home the rest of my life, but that's not really practical.
And
And
it's
I'm
not
using
much fun.
no, it's not much fun. And I'm using the weight, but it can really apply to any goal or
Mhm.
anything that you have.
Mhm.
You because for so long, up until that period of time, I was a victim of my circumstances. It was my mindset that I was a victim of my life.
Mhm.
Why me? Why me with the weight? Why me with, I have had to take care of other people for such a long period of time.
Mhm.
Well, everything I was on the outside, let me just say that I was not a Debbie Downer.
Mhm.
I was kind of the same person I am now. I was always upbeat, but even my friends and family, it would be like, oh, what happened to her now? What happened to her now? And that's kind of what it felt like.
Mhm.
And we all go through seasons. And I was doing the comparison thing, which
Mhm.
is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Terrible. And that's what, caused me to feel like, why me? And there's nothing I can do about it until I realized, no, I can do something about it.
Well, you actually had that reinforced by people who were saying, oh, what happened now, or went wrong this time. Then you really do feel like you're a victim, even if it goes against your inherent belief system. Once you keep hearing those messages over and over, you start to believe it.
Oh, I completely believed it, and it did seem that way, and, there's that comparison thing, looking at
Yeah.
my closest friends and family, they were not encountering all the struggles that I was, and, when I would show up at a holiday, because there was always something before the holiday, either my husband, as he got older and mental illness kicked in, he didn't want to come for the holiday. And then I would have an argument with him. And then I would drive down there and something with one of my kids. Like every time I got out of the car and said hello to everyone, they're like, okay, here's a drink. What happened now? And there always seemed to be something.
Hmm. Boy, that really does add up and it wears you down.
Oh,
So
yeah.
once you did start changing your mindset, starting with the weight loss, how did that just affect the rest of your life, the relationships, your business, all of that? So how did that start to just impact in a positive way other aspects of your life?
I started understanding a little more the practice of gratitude,
Mm,
something that I had heard. And I have to be honest, I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't understand it. I'm supposed to say, write, whatever, however, what I'm grateful for every day. What is this going to do?
mhm,
But then I found it helps to shift your mindset because,
mhm,
you know, we don't take stock of all the things that we're very fortunate to have in our lives. At least for me, I tended to focus on the negative. And when you start focusing on the positive, it really does help to shift that mindset.
mhm,
I After the weight, one of the next biggest thing that I started to tackle was my money situation.
mm,
And it was something that even now, even when I wrote my book,
mhm.
the story about my money situation was not in the original outline because I was too ashamed and I
Aw,
didn't want to share it. And in the end, I decided that if the goal of my book is to inspire and help people, I have to be 100% honest.
mhm,
And I'm sure there's other people out there who have some kind of shame or embarrassment around
mhm,
money. And if by me sharing my story can help them, then that's what it's all about. So, money was the next thing because I had always been in charge of our money.
mhm,
And I was very good at making excuses and never dealing with what was happening. So
mhm,
as time went on, there were circumstances that happened. My
mhm,
son needed a lot of therapy. It was not covered by insurance. As a
mhm.
mom, I said, I don't care what it costs.
Right.
I will do whatever it is. And I probably, went over and above and second mortgage and that kind of thing. And just a whole bunch of different circumstances. And then when I looked to try and cut back on our expenses and near the end, or I don't know, the end of my husband's life, a couple of years beforehand, I felt like we needed to move out of our house and downsize. But when I would mention that to him, or I would mention something about the money situation and maybe something about his spending when he was healthy, and he was the grocery guy, he was the cook, and he
Mhm,
would go to a million different stores, and some of the prices things he was buying, if I would say something, it would set him off into a deep dark depression or anxiety.
mm,
So I didn't, and I allowed those habits to continue, and I floated the idea of moving, and again, you know it didn't go over well. And so I just kept on going and went further and further into debt,
mhm,
wasn't able to pay my income taxes because as an entrepreneur, you don't have withholding taken out from your,
Mhm.
paycheck. You've got to do it yourself. And I was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I was, I, I was not, any time that I thought about it, the situation, I just kind of shoved it down. Don't think about it. I just kept hoping, praying that somehow a miraculous solution would appear in front of me.
Mhm.
And in February of 2020, I went with my cousin to a live event that Oprah was having right before lockdown. This was like February of 2020. Oprah was on a transformational tour. She went to like 9 or 10 different cities. And we went in Brooklyn. And at the end of the day, it was Oprah on the stage. They dim the lights and she tells this very vulnerable story and then says, "What secret do you have that you're not paying attention to?" And then she further went on to explain, if you don't address this, it's going to erupt like a volcano, and then you will have no control.
Mhm.
You're so much better off addressing it now, even if you are very unhappy with what you'll need to do, it's still better.
Mhm.
And I just started crying,
Mm.
and I knew that she was speaking to me,
Mm.
and she was right.
Mm.
And I went home and said, I've got to do something. And I started to take stock of the situation and, moved on from there. And I'm
Mhm.
still almost 3 years later, it's
Mhm.
not over,
Mhm.
but at least I'm in control.
Right.
And I have choices.
Mhm. Wow, that's amazing. As a matter of fact, I just have a little sentence that had popped out. I was reading a book and I said, "Oh, I have to write that down." It just really, spoke to me at the time, and it's it's at the top of your show notes. I don't know why. It's kind of serendipitous. And the phrase was, or the saying was, "Control is the sharpest sword, and a weapon only he possessed."
Mm.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you then, because there was so much, shame around the money and being that vulnerable, putting it in the book. Once the book was published, did you have what I would call a, oh, holy crap moment?
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
okay, writer's remorse. What have I done? You can't get the genie back in the bottle.
absolutely. I mean, really more so that feeling with my friends and family, and local people who knew me. If you didn't know me and you're reading my book, it's okay. But those who knew me, and
Mhm.
my mother said to me, "I can't believe that you kept this to yourself and you never told me." And I said, "What was the point of telling you?" I was embarrassed
Mhm.
and just could not share it with anyone. And the freedom that I experience now
Mhm.
is unreal. I mean, that fear and anxiety, even though I was trying to never think about it, it
Mhm.
was always there. Any little thing that I heard, it would always be a reminder of something to do with my money. Even
Mhm.
though I was trying to ignore it, who knows what the heck the stress of this was doing to my body.
Right, exactly. Well, and the reason why I was really curious about that, because when my second book was published, and there's a lot of really personal stuff in that, really personal. And after it was published, I had 3 really bad weeks. I just didn't even want to leave the house. I wanted to crawl under the covers. I really wanted to crawl under the bed.
Yeah.
And then, but I wouldn't fit. And then I convinced myself that, well, wait a minute. No one who knows you is going to read the book. It's going to be fine. If strangers will read it, and that's fine. They don't know me. It's perfectly fine. My friends aren't going to read it. Certainly my sisters aren't going to read it, although they knew some of it. But I thought, it's okay. No one who knows me is going to read it, so it's fine. So I convinced myself of that. And the next day I went to the dojo, and my sensei had a copy of my book on his desk. And it's like, okay, back under the covers I go, because a lot of times he's a big part of the story. And a lot of times he's the hero, and a lot of times he's not.
Mm.
But
So what
he's
was
still,
his reaction?
he didn't, he says, hey, could you sign it for me? And I'm like, okay. And then he told me about a week or two later, one of his friends picked it up and started reading part of it. And he just stopped and he looked at my sensei and he said, are you okay with this? And Mark just shrugged his shoulders and he said, it's her story. It's not mine. It's her story to tell. And he couldn't argue with a lot of the points that didn't make him look so good anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. So you didn't tell him beforehand?
No. And I figured he wasn't ever going to read it. He'd never see it. He wouldn't care. And the funny thing was, for the next couple of weeks, when we would be working out, or doing things at the dojo, and it's a very fun martial arts. It's serious, but it's a very fun style too. And of course, we're ninjas, so we joke around a lot. And after, we would be working on something, and he would walk by and he said, "That's on page 43." And then another time, that's on page 112. So yeah, he still loves me and he's still speaking to me, so it's all good.
Oh, good. And what about your sisters and everybody else? Did they read it?
No, I don't think any of my sisters read it or bought it, and that's fine. I don't care, because then that tells me that they won't be reading the next ones, and I have other things to tell. But several of my friends did. I had no idea. I really didn't promote it locally. The first book, I had like a big launch party and stuff. I didn't really promote it, but some of my friends, especially my ballet friends, did see it and they bought it. And one of them told me just a few weeks ago, she said, I just read it, and she says, it's fantastic. And I'm like, oh, well, thanks.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So when did you decide to write it?
Oh, now that's a good question.
Mhm.
So let me just tell you that I never wanted to be a writer.
Who does?
I don't know. There seem to be people out there. There's some kind of statistic about, I don't know what it is, and this is probably wrong, so don't quote me, but let's just say, like, 85% of people out there want to write a book and like 3% actually do. Well, I wasn't part of those 85%.
Mhm.
I never wanted to write a book. And what happened was, especially after the Oprah thing, I really started paying attention to little signs, my intuition, the whispers that life was giving me. And people were always saying, you should really write a book. You're going to write a book. And I'd say, yeah, someday. But I didn't really mean that. And it kept coming up. And one day I was listening to a podcast, actually, a podcast I did not regularly listen to. And there was a guest, and it was a woman who helped first-time authors get their stories out there. And I really related to her. And I thought to myself, well, I think this must be a sign. I need to meet her. So we hopped on a Zoom together and, loved her instantly and felt that, she was the one who was going to help me. And she was just about to launch a course, 12-week course for first-time authors. And simultaneously, that's when my husband was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And I remember saying to my therapist, I'm embarrassed to tell you that I'm even considering this. But let me just tell you. And I tell her, and I share with her that I'm worried. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. What if I show up to the weekly group and there was an assignment and I didn't do it? Because I'm an A student, so I would feel very uncomfortable. And what would happen if they make me read my book or whatever I wrote that week out loud to them, and they're going to judge me, and they're going to think this sounds like See Dick Run books. because it's so basic. I was 1,000% convinced of that. And she said, who cares? You're not in school. It doesn't make any difference. And you need something else to focus on other than this difficult period that you're going through. And yes, you should do it. And I was shocked. And I did. I really was good with my accountability. I wrote almost, every day. I slotted times to do that, either before my husband woke up or, if he was resting or whatever in the afternoon. And when he passed away December 30th, 2022. I was two chapters shy of finishing.
Wow. Again, I have to say congratulations. You have so much tenacity and so much determination.
It's so funny because people have been saying that to me, and I don't recognize that. And I'm not really sure. I don't know why. And I think I'm starting to understand because I take action. I guess that's what the difference is. How many of us want to do something, dream of doing something? We even start and then something else happens and we forget all about it and we put it aside. And just recently I ran into a woman who told me some story of something that she wanted to do. And she said, you know what? That was 3 years ago and it's sitting over there in the corner of my office collecting dust.
Oh.
And I think so many of us do that. So I guess I do need to pat myself on the back because, it's hard. It's hard to say, at least for me to say, hey, good job.
I know.
But it's important.
So I would just want to say good job with the title too. And how did you come up with the title? Was that a struggle or was that something that just like popped out of you?
So part of my journey, this is prior to writing the book. I had worked a few times with somebody called a story coach. And he kind of, I shared my life story with him. And at the time, it was for business reasons. At the time, I was actually looking to do something a little different than I'm doing now. And he was the one who said, in your story, there's all these moments when you approached, that fork in the road and you said, maybe I can. And he came up with the maybe I can. And that really stuck with me. And when I thought about it, it really is the on second thought is very important to me because how many times did something happen? Let's just say someone said, do you want to learn to knit? Because this is a good example for me. Nope. I don't want to learn to knit. I don't have a creative bone in my body. I have no desire. I can't do it. Blah, 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 blah. But if I go past that, you wait that beat and say, well, wait a minute. Why can't I knit? Other people learn to knit. I've done other things. Why can't I give it a try? It's that on second thought. For me, my first reaction is always that protective mode, right? Like that fear of putting yourself out there. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to fail. And if you get past that little voice in your head and give it a minute for, the angel to pop in and say, hey, wait a second, on second thought, maybe I can do that. So that's where the title came from.
I love it. I can't tell you how many things in my life that I did not want to do because I knew I either would hate it or I would be terrible at it. Or, by the way, I am a master knitter, just so you do know that. And that was my own. Yeah, I'm very good. I know.
Ooh.
That.
I'm still working on it.
Oh, well, knitting is so relaxing and it's really good for anxiety when you know what you're doing. But the learning process is a little tough. And I had stopped knitting for 12 years. Long story, but I stopped knitting. I started knitting with words instead and writing my books. But then I picked up my needles again after 12 years and it was like, where do I begin? I forgot almost everything. So it took me a while to get back into the swing of things. And it was so frustrating for me at first. And I will admit I was cussing a little bit, quite a bit. But my husband was sitting there going, aren't you glad you decided to start knitting again? But once you get into the groove, it's very relaxing.
You know what? I have to say, I am shocked. So I said knitting because last year, right around Christmas, it was literally 5 days before my husband died.
Oh,
My friend said something to me about knitting. She's also a master knitter. And in the past, I would always say no. And I think I said what I just said to you, I think I said to her. And the problem is now everybody can throw my words back in my face, right? She's like, well, what happened to maybe I can? And I said,
yeah.
you know what? You're right. And she has been, an amazing teacher for me. And I was shocked at how
Mhm.
relaxing I did and I do find it. When it's stressful, like you said earlier, I don't know how to fix my mistakes.
Right.
I see something happen, and now luckily my friend is amazing. She's almost like the knitting hotline. I call her up and I either bring it to her. I'm not kidding. Sometimes I've left it on my doorstep, and if she's driving by, she'll stop and she'll fix it for me so I can keep going.
Oh, she's a good friend.
Oh,
As a
yeah.
matter of fact, before we logged in this morning, I was upstairs ripping out part of a baby sweater that I'm making
Oh,
because I made such a huge faux pas. And it was like, this was such a beginner's mistake, but I guess I was distracted. So I had to rip out the sleeve and start over again. So that's what I
that's
will be
okay.
doing this afternoon. Exactly. But I find it really interesting and very funny that you basically kind of painted yourself into a corner with
Oh,
that
yeah.
title.
Oh, yeah. That's what everybody says to me. So as I said before, my husband did all the cooking and the food shopping, and I don't know how to cook.
Mhm,
I literally don't know how to cook.
mhm,
I have never had an interest in it. Before I met my husband, when I lived alone, I lived on frozen dinners or stopping at my mother's house
mhm.
or takeout. And so I had another friend after my husband passed away that like took me to the grocery store and was pointing out things. You can do this with that, and you can do that with this. And came home and showed me how to make one dish. And I bought an air fryer. And because that's easier for someone
Mhm,
who doesn't have any cooking experience. I have to say, I
mhm,
still don't enjoy it at all. And I really still do a little bit of the frozen dinner thing,
mhm.
but I'm better than I was before, and I'm still trying, so that's all that matters. I don't think I will ever like it, but I'm doing it.
Well, I have another friend who I think she was probably 58 or maybe even 60, who decided it was time that she learn how to cook. She never knew how to cook. And she lives alone, so it really didn't matter, but she just got this idea that she should learn how to cook. And it was hilarious. She started by buying her first cookbook was 150 ways to make grilled cheese sandwiches, something like that. It was like, really, you're starting here? And I've had to go over her house a few times to kind of help her out and bail her out. She's really, really funny. She's
Oh my
actually my
goodness.
publishing consultant. So
Oh, that's so funny. She and I need to hook up.
she is awesome. Her name is Polly Latovsky. Polly, I know you're listening to this. And she is actually the first woman who walked around the world.
Really?
And she really did it. She started up in Vail. She was living in Vail, Colorado at the time. And, it was this big thing. She took 3 years to plan it. She's very meticulous. Everything's on a spreadsheet. So she said the whole town showed up to see her off, and there was all the media, the newspaper, the all the news stations, all of these people flew in, friends and family from all over the country. They started in the town square and they all walked together with her to cheer her on. The minute they got to like the city limit, they all just waved goodbye and said, okay, well, good luck. And they sat there and waited for their taxi cabs to come and pick them up and take them home. And so she just went on down the road by herself. But she did walk around the world. And when she was doing it for breast cancer awareness, especially for countries that were either third world countries or that, just didn't have the equipment, or even in certain countries where women would rather die of cancer than go to the doctor and have them see their breasts. So that was her goal. And while she was walking was when 9/11 happened.
Unbelievable.
So she wrote a book about it, and she actually got taken by a predatory publisher. And while they were going through the legal battle, she just dove into finding everything that she could about self-publishing and independent publishing. The woman is amazing. She's
It
brilliant.
sounds like it. Oh, what's the name of her book?
3 mph.
I'm writing it
3 mph,
down.
standing for 3 miles per hour. And her name is Polly Latovsky.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can go to her website, is My Word Publishing. Geez, Polly, you're going to have to give me, a kickback on this. But it's My Word Publishing, and it's kind of like a, you can pick and choose whatever service you need. And
Yes.
she's amazing to work with, and her team is absolutely fabulous. So,
Well, thank you.
So we sure did segue there. So when did you decide to start your podcast?
I started my podcast in May. It was something that I really resisted for a very long time. I have a business coach, and I was writing a blog, and she kept saying, we're going to take the blog and turn it into a podcast. And I was so resistant, and she just kept telling me, I'm telling you, once you start this, you'll be so glad that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And, back to that maybe I can thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I started a podcast. I think the scary part was all of those fears.
Mm-hmm.
Fear of not being good enough, and look, I'm learning. I
Mm-hmm.
feel there's things that I need to improve on, a lot of things, but that's okay, because,
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, I forget when I listen to people, hosts of podcasts, and I think, boy, why can't I sound like them? I never stop to think they've been doing it for 5 years. Why don't you go back and listen to the first 10 episodes that they did?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I comparing myself to somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's, so far down the road? That's not helpful.
No, I go back and I don't listen. I did it once. To one of my early episodes, and I thought, oh my gosh, I think my ears are going to start bleeding. It was I couldn't stay, but it's a work in progress, and I still make some incredible mistakes, like showing up in my bathrobe, stuff like that, and you just have to laugh it off, and it's real life. And I think that's one thing that COVID taught us, is that we don't have to be perfect, because even the professional newscasters, while we're all locked down, you could hear the dogs barking in the background. One of them actually was doing the weather, and the newscaster said, oh, and we hear barking in the background. So he actually physically bent down and came back up holding a dog. And it's like, you know what? It's real life. And
which
that's
is great. Don't you love that? I mean,
I do. Yeah.
I do. I love that relaxed feeling. And I like, seeing people in their native environment, so to speak, right? In their houses, see what it looks like. See, I don't know. I like
their native habitat.
That's right.
Or their natural habitat. I like that.
Yes.
And tell us now about the Sprinkle of Hearts. I love that name too.
So last November, as I'm still finishing my memoir, I was scrolling, shopping or something at night in my bed on my phone, and I put in the word hearts to search for that, as I always had when I was in college. So I've always loved hearts since I was a little girl. I can't tell you why, I have. And when I was in college, there was a store in Washington, D.C., when I went to school, that only sold products with hearts.
Aww.
And I loved that store so much. I would bother my friends to, can't we go there? Let's just go over there today. And I would always say, someday I am going to own a heart store. I don't know if it's this store or I'm going to open my own, but I'm going to own a heart store. And of course, life happened. The heart store went out the window. I really never thought about it again. In the however many years, 35 or 40 years, of course, I was still a heart freak. I always thought about it. But that night, something happened. And it dawned on me, I don't need a brick and mortar store.
Right.
Now I can do it online. And I was lucky enough to have a few people that I knew kind of had online stores and helped people set them up. And the next day I called her, named Sarah Jansel, and I said, Sarah, okay. And I tell her this story and I said, but I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to be able to ship. Like, can I still do it? And she said, yes. And I'm like, did you hear what I said? And she said, yes. And that's what happened. And ironically, I set the launch date as January 14th. So this is November, literally the week before Thanksgiving. I set the launch date for 2 months later, January 14th, a month before Valentine's Day, which again wound up to be 2 weeks after my husband passed away. And it happened. We launched.
My goodness.
And I love it. I mean, I think I wish I had the stuff. I can see it over there. I think I opened the store just so I could buy everything in it.
Well, I am definitely going to include the link to your store in the
Thank you.
show notes. I'm not sure if I have that or not, but I will look it up and I will include that in the show
Thank you.
notes. So speaking of links, tell the listeners where they can get a hold of you, how they can contact you. So give us some of the links to your social media, your website, and your podcast. And of course, this is in the show notes, but I really like the guests to be able to articulate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the best place is my website. It's DebbieRWeiss.com. So DebbieR. The R is very important. Otherwise, you're going to get a realtor. So DebbieRWeiss, WEISS.com. And on there, there's the links to everything. I have about 4, I think, free downloads, 3 PDFs that are helpful: self-care, morning journaling, unlocking your potential. And then I have a free book preview as well. And there is a wait list to my coaching program and all the social media links.
Yay.
Most of Instagram is usually where I am. It's Debbie.R.Weiss there, but I am also on Facebook and TikTok. And I went viral on TikTok. I am not a TikToker, so to speak. I don't scroll or look, but I do post my videos there. And I went viral in January, 3.7 million views.
Wow.
It was crazy, crazy. So
now, do you have that many views on YouTube? I mean, because I think I followed you on Instagram and I checked out all of your social media. Okay, I just wondered, but that's incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so exciting, especially from someone who, like I said, I'm really not on TikTok. And I think I'm sure I had under 100 followers when it happened. And now I have 57,000.
That's incredible.
Yeah, you just never know.
Well, Debbie, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And could you just leave one final pearl of wisdom for the listeners?
Thank you. Yes, and it's been a wonderful conversation. I could keep going and talking to you for the rest of the day.
I could too, but I think we have another appointment.
So I'm going to leave you with what has now become my favorite quote a couple of years ago, a quote that I think many of us have heard time and time again, and I had heard it many times. And one day I heard it again, and it just resonated with me very differently. And it's from Glinda the Good Witch of the Wizard of Oz, who said, "You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." And I always, thought that it was, surface. Like Dorothy, just say there's no place like home and click your heels 3 times. But then I realized, oh no, this is literally my message. I didn't know I had the power. And each of us has the power. We just have to learn it. And it took me 50 plus years to learn it. And I don't care how old, young, whatever you are, it's never too late to learn it and take control of your life.
Oh, that is perfect. Thank you so much. That is so profound.
It is. It is. And like I said, it's just so interesting how you can hear something a million times and then one day it just strikes you differently.
Mhm. Well, thanks again, Debbie, for being on the show. This has been really entertaining and a lot of fun. And I think you are quite the inspiration, and, your tenacity of spirit and your warrior spirit, you just kind of like oozes out of you.
Thank you so much.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Do go to Debbie's website, check out her books, check out her blog, check out her TikTok, site. I don't do TikTok, but it sounds like it's pretty amazing. And do connect with her. It's just, what an incredible story, an incredible message that we've always had the power. We just have to find it for ourselves. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.